Welcome to Personal Nirvana, a podcast about mental health, psychedelics, and this modern world. Your hosts, Dr. Marcel Green and John Biggs, will explore the latest in psychiatry, medicine, and healing from a no-nonsense point of view. Dr. Green specializes in interventional psychiatry and has degrees from Columbia University and the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai, while John Biggs is a reporter and author with a focus on technology. Together, they hope to tear down the walls between you and your personal nirvana.
Welcome back to Personal Nirvana, a podcast about psychedelics, self-care. I'm here with Dr. Marcel Green, my partner in crime on this operation. Once again, this is all about healing through psychedelics. I'm the dumb guy, Marcel's the smart guy, and I ask the dumb questions, he answers impeccably. I think that's how we drew up the contract, right?
Play the smart guy on TV sometimes.
That sounds good.
I know about podcasts.
All right, so we've got we were just talking about this. We've got 4 years of quite a bit of disconcerting news coming out in the world. How are we supposed to manage this? What are we supposed to do? I'm personally going to probably move to Canada or something, but what if we don't have that opportunity? What should we do?
Yeah. I would say, this is going to sound corny, and I'm happy to explain this, but be present. Every day is different. Every day is a challenge. Do not let your preconceived notions, even if it's based on past experience, take over your peace of mind. And define what those foundations that you are using to anchor yourself in the present is. That would be a good move to do today. So some things that people are doing are modulating their media intake, for example, replacing that with things that they know add some value or enhance your peace of mind for the day. That's being intentional. I am including in my day things that I know will support my peace of mind and subtracting things that I know will detract from it, media or whatever else. So that's a first recommendation. But to be honest, I might be moving too.
Okay, so I guess we both can head out. We can do the podcast. We can do the podcast from up north. All right. So that's an interesting point. So what I really wanted to do for the first couple episodes before we start getting guests on is I wanted to talk about just each one of the therapies that are available to humanity. You're expert in ketamine, obviously, so we could maybe start with that. My familiarity with it sort of begins and ends with the understanding that first off, ketamine is a dissociative drug. So you basically disassociate from your physical self and you can start thinking, and similar to all these psychedelics. And right now, the most popular therapy is nasal, right? So you basically squirt a little bit up your nose, you wait it out, work through your troubles. Is it that easy? Can I just go get some ketamine and squirt it up my nose, or what should I be doing?
So first and foremost, I have to say that with a psychedelic, when becoming familiar with it, it's important to do it in a guided setting. So with somebody who knows how to sit with and potentially help guide it for you. Only when developing familiarity enough to navigate the experience by yourself. And I would actually let the guide confirm that you're at that place. Then do it by yourself. I would not buy it and try it. Mm-hmm. First of all, because you don't necessarily know what dose is going to be too much. It could be the lowest dose. And if it's too much, for you at that given time, not too much in general, because you may come to be able to respond well to that same dose. But if it's too much up front, that's when people have the bad trip. The bad trip doesn't mean it's off limits for you. It just means that you had a dose that was too much for you. And it was so dissociative that it was terrifying. And that's what the dissociation, that's how it relates to having a bad trip, basically. So I wouldn't do it independently at first.
So you just feel like, so in this case, it would feel like you had no control of yourself. What would the feeling be?
Absolutely. The way I like to describe it to people is imagine what it may feel like. And we have little basis for understanding what this feels like. Maybe people who've survived near-death experiences, but imagine what a newborn infant may experience when all of their senses come on to the outside world all at once. A flooding that's so disorienting. That's where the terror comes from. Because again, our peace of mind is anchored in the fact that we have right now, as we are participating in this, everything in our sensory field is familiar. And we assume that it's not going to change. We assume that it's going to remain familiar through the duration of experience. That's the basis for psychological comfort and understanding of this particular moment. So imagine everything in your sensory world being scrambled to such an extent that you do not recognize what you are experiencing. And so that's dissociation to the most severe extent. And that's what you can experience if you have too high a dose at once. That's the bad trip.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like the goal is to find somebody like you, somebody who can manage this. It's not really a shaman per se. It's essentially a doctor, right? We don't want to go woo-woo on this.
I mean, I have to give credit where credit is due. I mean, this is brought back into the medical field from indigenous spaces. And so, if it's somebody that's been crowdsourced to be dependable, I know people that I recommend. However, I would say if you're exposing yourself to a psychedelic initially, yes, go with a clinician who's trained and has verifiable credentials.
Okay, so let's talk me through the like a session. What does that entail?
All right, so it depends on the nature. So, like if we are doing more of what you would find in, say, a ketamine infusion facility or Spravato intranasal, there's going to be some prep work. So prep conversation to give you a sense of what to expect. I usually say to expect sensory alteration, especially when you're starting at the lower doses. You're not going to get that full scrambling of your sensory field, but you'll get a very light version of it and what to expect. So people usually describe this sensation as interesting if the dose is low enough. And I start off with low doses so it's not intimidating, and so it's more interesting, so you can begin to preview the changes you will experience as we advance the doses. Some people describe a lightness. People sometimes might see aspects of their visual field floating. People may notice enhancement of things that you take in. So if you're listening to music, you'll notice there's an enhancement of your emotional response to the music. And that's sort of the reason why people might do MDMA at parties, because the sensory experience is more enhanced, and it's interesting. And so prep work to describe what you're going to experience. And then we begin to discuss how that initial experience can relate to your particular mental health goals. Once I do that prep work, that's where we forge what's called intentions, things that you'll keep in mind as the experience progresses. And then either I'm in the room if that's what somebody wants, or we'll meet afterwards to discuss what they experienced. And then the goal is to try to understand what really is an abstract experience and how it relates to your mental health challenges and the goals that we're seeking.
And what's the theory behind that? So we're talking about something that's like you said, it's an abstract experience. It's something. So first off, it's very, very subjective. You're not in my head. You don't know what, and you actually don't know what the result is. So how do you do psychology around something that is so amorphous?
Yes, this is where it gets fun, to be honest, and this is where it becomes more art to me. But it's anchored in psychology, basically. And so one way I like to frame it is, what is this psychedelic experience allowing you to feel or experience that is different than your normal conscious experience of life? Because what we're doing by enhancing your senses, also kind of changing the way your thoughts flow, how you experience your thoughts, how your body reacts to your thoughts, how your body reacts to this alteration of senses, is illuminating what effectively happens when we are locked into one way of experiencing the world. That's at the expense of a lot of things. So we walk around with sort of psychological biases. The concept is that those biases relate to your mental health challenges. Your conscious experience of the world doesn't fit the circumstance, for example, and you need a new perspective. That perspective is hidden from you by the way that you view the world. And so when we go into the psychedelic space, we lower those biases and we can see things from a larger perspective. And so the point is to go into this abstract space and then notice what you don't normally see, and then discuss the significance of why you're experiencing that in the psychedelic space and what this can tell you about your mental health challenges.
Why should I do this instead of like, I don't know, antidepressants, right? So I had antidepressants to the 2018 for a couple years. Just I really didn't like them. Getting off them was kind of hell as well. What's the difference?
Absolutely. Just like in other aspects of life, if we feel it, we know it's true, more so than if somebody told it to us. And so that's why I tend to describe psychedelics like experiential therapy. If I feel this change of perspective, it's more powerful than if I'm dialoguing about it with the therapist and the therapist is suggesting, hey, you should look at it this way. However, I'm so locked into the way I view the world, not because something's wrong with me, just because that's logical. The world shaped me to view the world this way. It makes so much sense. It's been validated daily. It's hard to kind of change perspective easily. However, one way of doing this is through therapy, which takes some time because the therapist may ultimately suggest the right perspective to help me navigate the current experience. However, unless I feel it, it's not real to me. However, in the psychedelic space, I feel it. And so when I discuss intentions, it's supposed to help cue your mind to be open to these new perspectives. And then you find that perspective and experience it. Once you experience it, it's realer to you and it can facilitate change. That's why it's powerful. When you're doing antidepressants, none of that is happening. And so that's why I would argue for psychedelics augmenting your mental health care.
And obviously we can't make any recommendations, but the idea would be to avoid the SSRIs and maybe try to do this before.
Well,
what do you think?
I like to think of the psychedelic as being a contemporary tool. And when somebody's coming to me for care, I do not deviate from tried and true things that have been researched and become first line. And so I actually, unless somebody specifically wants to avoid antidepressants, I still recommend it as first line. I still recommend therapy as first line. And in fact, if somebody were to come to me in the office, I would say, try those things first or try it with the psychedelic together. But the psychedelic's a tool. And in terms of what we know about it from research, it's as a tool. So efficacy data is using it as a tool, not monotherapy. As of yet, I mean, those studies are happening, but as of yet, we can't really deviate from the recommendations of first-line care. Now, I do treat people who prefer psychedelics as first line. I have tremendous experience of that. And I have people who experience efficacy with it as the initial treatment recommendation. So I vouch for that if somebody's insistent.
How do you fix? I've talked to a few people now, and they've always asked me these questions, like, how do you fix somebody who's like who's fully depressed, like who's been depressed all their life, can't break out of it?
Yes. I get many people like this. And so first comes the assessment, to be honest, because I need to know a little bit more of the rationale of why that's been the case. A lot of times it usually signals that there's been an early life trauma and the effect it has had in shaping how a person thinks and moves about the world serves to reinforce that frame of mind. So, for example, let's say I was bullied and then abused on top of that by people in my home. Well, my general view of people is not going to be so good. I'm going to, thereafter, the way I engage people is probably going to be with some measure of hesitation because I fear being re-victimized. If I approach people with at arm's distance, well, people are going to react to me in kind. And so it's going to reinforce interpersonal dynamics that make it difficult for me to form good relationships, which ultimately would invalidate that experience from that previous trauma. So, for example, if somebody comes to me at 40 years old and say, I've never had a friend, I've never had a romantic relationship, my first instinct is to go back in time to see what's the logic of you having this impression at this time. Like I said, it's probably an early trauma that's been reinforced, basically. That's number one. Psychodynamically understand, why is somebody depressed forever? There is a logic. It might escape them, but there is a logic. That's my job first. Second, once I have a handle on the logic, then I can start to think about what interventions make sense for this person. It could be trauma therapy alone. It could be EMDR. It could be psychedelics. Depends.
What happens if somebody wants a quick fix? Do you think there's any value in just like dosing yourself, laying on the couch, hoping for the best?
Absolutely. I mean, again, like I take care of all types of people. So, I have people who have previous experience through recreational use. What I do find is that for those who are able to connect to something in the psychedelic space from initial use, they were already predisposed to doing that. Either they're somebody who's very introspective, and so stepping out of their normal thinking pattern, having access to multiple different perspectives and finding that insightful, they're already predisposed to that by being quite introspective already. There's a lot of people, however, who their experience of it is as a high, and they can't make sense out of how this relates to their mental health challenges or goals. And so those are the folks that I usually have to do prep work prior to.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I mean, you have like a whole generation, say boomers and like early Gen X. They don't want any part of this. That all their stories have been like some guy took a bunch of mushrooms and jumped off, I don't know, a building or whatever, or MK Ultra and all the other goofy stuff. Mm-hmm. Is there a way to crack that reticence for older folks who might be afraid of this thing?
Yeah, absolutely. First and foremost, I just want to understand, and I had this conversation this morning. What's the rationale for the hesitation? There's some stigma that they've been conditioned to associate with psychedelics, and I basically just deconstruct the stigma. And again, I'm also gentle. I'm not pushing it. If they have a preferred way of addressing mental health, we'll lean into that direction. However, if I do believe it has a role to play in their care, I'll reinforce it gently, giving my rationale for why there's no reason to be afraid, and basically deconstructing the stigma. And usually people, their interest develops over time.
Okay. So it's all ages at this point, right?
All ages.
Huh. Okay. All right. What's the first step if somebody wants ketamine treatment and you're not in their town? What should they do?
Find somebody in their town or near them.
Like how do you vet somebody like that, right?
Yeah. So again, an initial mental health assessment is my foundation, and so where it relates to ketamine, I do want to know if they have a history of excess substance use or misuse. That's not an absolute contraindication for me or for people with experience. It is for some people, and rightfully so. I mean, I've definitely seen people who've been predisposed to excess use, and usually because you're using it as in a form of escape, as opposed to using it to confront vulnerabilities. So usually you can pick up a risk for that in the psych assessment. And then if that's not a risk, and that's usually one of a few warning signs. I mean, another is somebody who has uncontrolled blood pressure, because your blood pressure can raise a little bit while the ketamine's in your system. So if that's the case, usually I'll have somebody get a clearance from their medical provider. Third, I want to see if somebody is at risk for being extremely anxious when they, quote, lose control. Because if you experience sensory alteration to a certain point, that can alone trigger anxiety, just because, again, it's a sensory challenge to your control, your sense of having a predictable sensory environment as your basis for emotional comfort. That gets challenged. So usually somebody with panic attacks is somebody that I'll talk to about that potential. And then if that's the case, we can still move forward regardless of these risks, as long as we take proper care. But then we start at the lowest dose. And so, the lowest dose that's standard currently is 0.5 milligrams per kilogram of body weight. And that's usually something that's tolerable for most people. And if somebody is extra sensitive, just go below that. And that's how you start.
Okay. And that's taken pill form, or you do that up the nose, or how do you do that?
Depends on what's the most accessible to the person. Spravato, which is intranasal, is the form covered by insurance currently. So a certain fraction of people will gravitate to that one. And then the other formulations just depends on what one is interested in, as long as there's no reason not to. So IV, intramuscular, sublingual trophy. They have the oral dissolving tablets, and they have an intranasal that's not receiving. So that's not covered.
Okay. All right. Very cool. All right. So I think we covered everything there is to do. We should have just like done a skit where I walk into the doctor's office and you say lay down, and then I start screaming about, I don't know, bats or something like that. We could do that, but
Yeah.
I think we've done what we need to do in this.
Yeah, and indeed.
Yeah.
Happy to talk about anything, because I mean, a broad experience with this stuff.
Well, nobody knows about this stuff, right? So this is why I like to do this, because it's like I don't mind this like back and forth, like me being the journalist or whatever, since this is kind of like both of us, primarily because I'm the person that I'm asking the questions that everybody's asking me when I talk about this stuff, and I don't have somebody like you in my head to like tell me the answers. So now we've got a ready-made solution. So I guess the next couple episodes we'll just do this ayahuasca, maybe a little psilocybin, a little LSD. We'll talk about that one at a time, and then again, if you have any questions specifically for us, or actually for Dr. Green, email. Just reply to the email that you got if you got this in your podcast, or you can just email john@keepgoingpod.com. That'll get to me now. And then if you want to be a guest on the show, if you have experience yourself, by all means, reach out. I'd love to do a triple interview here, and we'll all share our expertise. Absolutely.
Looking forward to it. I will say, just off the bat, if there's any hesitation, talk to somebody like me. I mean, this is something that I personally believe everyone can benefit from. Psychedelics in general. Ketamine is what we have now, everyone, regardless.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, very cool. This has been Personal Nirvana. I'm John Biggs.
Green.
And we will see you next episode, if Dr. Green's busy schedule allows. Thanks for watching.
Cheers.
Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of Personal Nirvana. If you're enjoying the show, please feel free to rate, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. That helps others find the show, and we greatly appreciate it. Once again, thanks for listening, and we hope you'll join us on the next episode of Personal Nirvana.